Depression. Depression. I think all of us on some level, different levels, have experienced some type of depression in our lives. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. Darkness. Is darkness depression? So, ladies and gentlemen, this coming Monday, I'm going to be initiating a whole new series in The Singing Psychiatrist entitled, a creative title, called Topics in Psychiatry. And the first topic is going to be about depression, with a whole series of videos, which will come out every single Monday, all about depression. What is it? What does it feel like? What's going on deep inside somebody who's going through that intense depression? So, in a poem written with a little help from my friends, I'm going to share. A shadow sits behind my eyes, whispering truths in gentle lies. Morning breaks, but I do not. I wear a smile I somehow bought. The world moves fast, I drift behind. There's this ghost living inside my mind. And when they ask, are you okay? I nod and hope they walk away. Heavy, heavy, this heavy rain. No words can bridge what I contain. But still I rise, though beat and bruised, with quiet strength, the dark infused. For even stars are born at night, and broken hearts can still hold light. Yep, there's still hope. There's still light. So please join with me. Every single Monday, a video will be coming out about different topics about depression, about sadness and depression, about motivation, about lack of joy, about do we really need medication for depression, different kinds of therapy, talking about brain health, talking about melancholy, talking about when people embrace depression, and then what happens when people give up and they think about suicide. Depression. Please join me. And the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. And should you have any questions or comments during this, please see below. Please send me your questions or your comments, and I'd be happy to respond as best I can. A winter's day in a deep and dark December, I am alone. Yeah, we go through times where we feel alone. We go through times where we feel depressed. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go through a number of talks about the world of depression. First of all, it's important to distinguish between sadness and depression. We all go through times in life where we feel sad, where we feel down in the dumps as part of the human journey. We were created to experience that because by meeting the challenges of sadness, we actually grow and we can become better people. These feelings of sadness usually are from an external source, and they usually resolve ultimately on their own. Yeah, we can quicken the pace. We can use exercise, a good diet, and good sleep to try to help us get through these periods of sadness, but usually they will resolve on their own. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the sort of psychiatric depression, a deep, dark, palpable, what we would call like a biological depression that people go through. The problem is that somebody who goes through the sadness, they say, boy, I've been depressed. I know what depression feels like. So they turn to the palpable depressed person and they say something like, cheer up. Well, cheer up doesn't work. It doesn't resonate for these people. So we're going to talk about this psychiatric depression today. Basically, it consists of 9 symptoms. We're going to go through those. Now, this depression needs to last at least 2 weeks in time. Not just a few days, 2 weeks in time, most of the days in a 2-week period of time. The symptoms go like this. First of all, there's depressed mood. Times where we just feel deeply, deeply like there's a lack of meaning, a void inside of us. Suddenly crying for no reason. Extreme sadness, depression, but again, that lasts for at least 2 weeks in time. One other word we use for it is dysphoria. Second, what we call anhedonia. Anhedonia is a lack of joy, a lack of being able to enjoy the things we usually enjoy. Usually you might like sports or movies or books, and suddenly you just don't get any pleasure out of those things. What's happening is we have our neurons in our brain, and they're in our whole body, but especially in our brain, and the neurotransmitters which connect those neurons in our brain, well, they aren't really working on all cylinders. We don't have enough of a neurotransmitter, one of them called serotonin, sort of flowing through our body. And so the communications aren't happening like they should. As a result, the person will experience less joy. They just aren't interested in things that they usually would be fascinated and have pleasure in. The third symptom is the famous symptom of sleep, one of the most common complaints or descriptions that people give me. Sleep, insomnia, unable to sleep, not able to fall asleep or stay asleep or waking up early. In depression, these symptoms get even more intense. There also can be a hypersomnia, sleeping too much. I can't get myself out of bed. I'm just sort of frozen in bed. The fourth symptom is appetite, an extreme loss of appetite that people have. Again, this is related to the anhedonia that I just talked about. They just lose their pleasure in eating and their weight begins to go down. Obviously, this can be very significant. Then, of course, there can be overeating, eating too much, which, of course, many people experience. People eat because they're trying to fill that void that they have inside of them. This symptom has to do with loss of energy, fatigue, lying around, being a couch potato. You just don't have the get up and go that you used to have. The sixth symptom is actually getting sort of irritable and agitated, tons of anxiety that can result. I think this is because when somebody's feeling real down in the dumps or they are not having joy, they get frustrated. What's going on? And so it spurs a lot of internal irritability and agitation. Anger. Of course, I think it was Freud who said that depression is anger turned inward. The seventh symptom is a lack of concentration, poor focus. When the neurons aren't connecting, when the neurotransmitters aren't working like they should, you're going to wind up not being able to focus like you should. And of course, this can affect somebody's work. Oftentimes, this particular symptom can get confused with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where people have a hard time maintaining attention. So, of course, it's the job of the psychiatrist to tease this out and to come to the right arena of diagnosis because this affects treatment. Symptom number 8 is to have excessive feelings of guilt and shame, to feel absolutely terrible about oneself, helpless, hopeless. Of course, many people go through feelings of guilt and shame for all sorts of reasons. Things in their upbringing, they begin to have distorted thoughts about themselves. In depression, these get incredibly intense. And the ninth, the last symptom, unfortunately, sadly, tragically, is when people begin to think that they just don't want to exist anymore here on planet Earth. To have a death wish. Now, there can be a death wish or there can be suicidality. There's a difference. Death wish is what we call a passive death wish. If God was to take my life, if I was not to wake up tomorrow morning, I really wouldn't mind that. But they aren't actually putting together any kind of a plan or any kind of no intent. Suicidality is when things get to the point where they really seriously believe that they should not be here and they put together a plan, they think of a way of doing it, and they have an intention to do it. In these cases, people usually need to be in the safety of a psychiatric hospital to protect themselves against themselves. I have worked in psychiatric hospitals over the years, and I must say what happens to these people is what's going on inside of them is they really truly feel that the world would be better off without them. My kids would be better off without me. And so they start going through a serious suicidal plan with intention. These are the 9 symptoms of depression. From a diagnostic criteria perspective, you have to have 5 of the 9 in order to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder. So we're only talking about the symptoms. We aren't talking about treatment. We'll certainly get into treatment in future talks. But last, I just want to say what I've recognized over the years is really the crux for most people is the fact that they really don't have any sense of a purpose or mission in their life. They wake up every day just sort of going through the day, and then that puts them more vulnerable to a depressive episode. They don't know who they are. They aren't in touch with the real self, because we all have this thing inside of us. We call it a soul. The soul is the essence of who we are. If you know who you are and you know what your mission is, then you're way ahead and you're much more resilient to an episode of depression. It still can happen because people may have the DNA, they may have the biology that makes them susceptible to a depression, even if they do know essentially who they are and what their mission is. Of course, these are things that we will continue to talk about. I thank you. This is Dr. John Yaakov Guderson signing off. You say yes, and I say no. You say yes, and I say no, no, no. It happens all the time. A 27-year-old female comes into my office, and this is a fictional patient, but sort of a composite. She comes in, she says, "Doctor, I am depressed. I am so depressed. I need something right now. Please give me Prozac." Well, I could easily take out my script, take my pen, and write for Prozac for her. But the reality is this requires a little bit of looking into. You can't just sort of jump. And because somebody says I'm depressed, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are truly depressed to the point where they need to be swallowing pills. In fact, many people say when I ask them questions, my brother-in-law is sick, my children are having a hard time at school, my husband, he's a workaholic, and so I'm depressed. Give me some Prozac. You say yes, and I say no. So of course, this requires looking into the situation a little more closely, because I, in general, like to not give people medication if we really don't need to. In fact, people will show up in my office sometimes already taking psychiatric medications, sometimes 4, 5, or 6 psychiatric medications, and in my mind, it can be quite ridiculous. So I always look at trying to get people off of medications, possible not even giving them medications in the first place if they really are not warranted. Obviously, if they are warranted, then we will give them medication. A few things to look at, and mainly it has to do with lifestyle. I'd say 90% of the time that somebody comes to my office professing or saying that they're very depressed, I do ask them, do you exercise? And the usual answer is, nope, I don't exercise. I just don't have the energy. I just don't have the motivation to exercise. So then we look at other things in their life that may be contributing to their lack of energy, for example. We look at sleep. Sleep is vitally important. Most people we know need to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. It's always best to go to sleep basically the same time and wake up basically the same time. But people do all sorts of things to undermine their sleep. For example, people will have caffeine. Yeah, they'll have their coffee first thing in the morning. That energizes them. Then after maybe a few hours, 6 hours or so, they begin to feel sort of tired. So then maybe they'll have another coffee. Lo and behold, before you know it, some people claim I can even drink coffee in the late afternoon and be okay. But it does wreak havoc on somebody's sleep. It disturbs their sleep cycles, and therefore will deplete their energy because they aren't getting a good quality of sleep. Nutrition, of course, is vitally important. We need calories in order to feed the body and also to feed the brain. And if people aren't eating adequately, then that's a big problem as far as their energy goes. On the other side, people who are overeating, because many people, sadly, they overeat because they're trying to fill some kind of emptiness or void inside of them. Comfort eating, for example. But the question of exercise is a crucial one, because I've learned and I've seen so many times that people who exercise regularly do not fall into the depths of depression nearly as much. But people say, I lack motivation. So what has to happen then is what we call behavioral activation therapy, meaning start to do the action. And once you start to do the action, then the feeling will follow. They say, doctor, I just don't feel like exercising. Well, of course, many people don't feel like exercising. And if you follow your feelings, then you could go for years without exercising at all. The trick is to begin to do the action. Get yourself into action mode. Forget about how you're feeling about it. And most of the time when you get yourself into action mode, then the feeling will begin to follow. People have seen this time and time again. And so what I found is I say to them, look, I don't think you need Prozac. They may get upset at what I'm saying. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do some kind of exercise, even if it's just walking down the street for the first couple days, then try to extend it. Try to do a brisk walk. Try to do something aerobic if you can. Every single day, 6 out of the next 7 days, and then come back the next week and we'll see where you're at. Obviously, I try to instruct them on sleep and on appetite as well, but sometimes you can't do too much. So lo and behold, some of them don't show up the next week because they so much want their Prozac. They think Prozac's going to be a piece of nirvana for them, and so they don't show up. But most of the time they show up. And most of the time when they show up, lo and behold, they say, I'm feeling a lot better, and you're right, I don't really need the medication. You say yes, and I say no. You say yes, and I say no, no, no. But the reality of the situation is there's much more to this, because if a person really wakes up every day with a sense of purpose, why they're alive, this is another subject I talk about with them. To know what you're doing in this world, to know where you're going, to have a sense of purpose, to connect with the inner part of you, your soul. will go a long ways to having that strength and that resilience so that when things happen, you still have the freedom to choose your attitude no matter what comes your way. I'd unravel every riddle for any individual in trouble or in pain. With the thoughts I'd be thinking, I could be another Lincoln if I only had a brain. If I only had a brain. You know, back in medical school, I was able to actually hold a brain. Definitely a surreal experience. The brain, well, it's 2% of the entire body weight, but it requires 20% of the blood flow. Just a tiny grain of the brain, well, it can hold 100,000 neurons and billions of synapses. Amazing. Probably the most amazing creation in the entire universe. So there's different parts of the brain which are obviously important, especially in depression and in cognition. For example, we have the front of the brain called the frontal lobe. That's where you do executive functioning and decision making, rational thinking. There's the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory. Near the hippocampus is the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. Then you have the thalamus. It's a part that's it's like a relay station for sensory and emotional processing. And then there's the hypothalamus, where it helps to release hormones, which are important with sleep, appetite, and energy. All these areas, if they're not functioning right, certainly can result in depression, in negative thinking, in lack of energy, and all the elements that add to our challenges and our depressions that many of us may experience. Why? I could tell you why the ocean's near the shore. Yep. If I had a brain, I definitely could tell you why the ocean is near the shore. So now let's look at brain health, the things that we should avoid and the things that we should be doing. I have 9 things that I'd like to share with you with regard to good brain health. Number one is stress, chronic stress. Chronic stress is terrible for the brain. It releases high levels of cortisol, which can do major damage, especially on the area called the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory. Number 2 has to do with brain injuries, certainly with a stroke or with a tumor. But then there's traumatic brain injury, which of course we're reading a lot the last few years with regard to football. Head injuries. Be careful with playing soccer. When you hit that soccer ball with your head, the brain itself is soft. Even though the skull is hard, you can inflict major damage. Number 3 is toxins. Certain things that are poisonous, to be strong, to the brain. Things like illegal drugs, too much caffeine, alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, painkillers can incur major damage to the cells of the brain. Number 4, sleep. Of course, we need sleep. It's so important. Most people, they need to have at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Be careful. Don't do those ridiculous things at night, like looking at your phone, which will stimulate your brain and keep you up, having chocolate or sweets late at night, trying to go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time. Number 5 is to have a good diet. Obviously important. We talk about diet all the time, and we certainly know that people who have obesity can have major problems with their brain function. It's rare to find somebody who's very obese who is in their 90s. Think about that. So yeah, we want to avoid sugar. We want to avoid processed meats, saturated fats. Instead, think about things like the Mediterranean diet, lean proteins, omega-3 fatty acids, and foods that are high in antioxidants. Number 6 is a huge one. It's called exercise, because exercise increases the blood flow to the brain. To do physical exercise may be the most important thing of all for brain health. As I said, 20% of blood flow in the body goes to the brain, and exercise increases that. So to exercise, to do cardio exercise, whatever's okay with your PCP, you should do at least 3 or 4 times a week for probably about a half an hour at a time. Number 7 is a different kind of exercise, mental exercise. You know, we hear about all these things about retiring, but one should never retire. Doesn't mean we should continue to do the same job we've done our whole life. We should continue to be active and to do things and to serve our purpose in this world. Mental exercise, well, good ideas are to go dancing. Dancing can be very powerful and also can help with balance. Also yoga. Learn a new instrument. Take on a new instrument. And also learning a new language. All these mental exercises can be very powerful to help the cells of the brain. Number 8 is to avoid social isolation. People, as they get older, they can become more and more lonely. And as people become more and more lonely and they're sort of stuck in themselves, then their brain is not moving, they aren't relating to others. We need to avoid being socially isolative. Even if you are feeling down in the dumps, feeling like you don't want to be doing much to be with other people, lacking that motivation, you need to force yourself, get yourself into action mode, and get yourself out and join groups, get together with people. It can be very powerful. Number 9, well, number 9 is the essence of who we really are. It's our soul. When we wake up every day, connected to that part of us, knowing why we are here and what our purpose is, nothing could be stronger than that. To wake up with a sense of gratitude for all the blessings, all the good things that we have, and to be in touch with that can certainly engender positive energy, which is fantastic for our brain cells, our brain health. You know, they say the soul is sort of everywhere there in our body, essentially, but it's most revealed in the brain, because the brain is the control center for the rest of the body, our soul. So in closing, I would not be just a nothing, my head all full of stuffing, my heart all full of pain. I would dance and be merry, life would be a ding-a-dairy if I only had a brain. If I only had a brain. Yep, so take care of your brain. Doctor, my eyes have seen the years. Yep, my eyes, your eyes, we've all seen all sorts of things. So let's take a look at this list of individuals. Ernest Hemingway, Demi Lovato, Kurt Cobain, Mariah Carey, Edgar Allan Poe, Virginia Woolf, the poet Robert Lowell, Vincent van Gogh, Mel Gibson, Robin Williams. These people unfortunately suffered. They suffered from bipolar illness, what we also call manic depression. Now, people come to my office and they'll say, Doctor, I have bipolar because on a Sunday, over the course of a few hours, my mood, it goes up and down and up and down. But that's not bipolar. That's what we call mood fluctuations. No, bipolar means two, the two poles, bipolar, the upper pole, hyper, manic pole, and the lower pole, deep, dark depression. So what is a manic episode? A manic episode is something that lasts about a week, not just on a Sunday. During that time, a person hardly needs any sleep whatsoever, and yet they have tons and tons of energy. They go out on spending sprees, buying things they don't need, stupid stuff. They become sexually promiscuous. They become very impulsive, start turning to drugs, alcohol, driving fast. In more serious episodes, they can become very grandiose and think that they have special powers standing perhaps on a tall building. Or they can have paranoid delusions. They also, somebody in the midst of a manic episode, they lack insight. They don't realize that they're in the midst of that manic episode because they feel great. They feel on top of the world. They say, don't bother me. I feel great. Now, a person can't be manic forever because there's the other side, the depressed side. And I've seen people with manic depression. The depressed side can be incredibly intense. These people can become essentially immobile. They feel tortured. Their mind moves into a different realm altogether. And then they begin to believe that the world would be better off without them. And they can become suicidal. There's different types of bipolar. There's what we call bipolar 1, which is more of the manic phase, along with depression. And then there's bipolar 2, which is a less intense mania, what we call hypomania. And it is predominantly the episodes of depression. These conditions require slightly different treatment. As far as treatment goes, well, the gold standard is lithium. Now, I'm not a big medication guy, but I've learned over time that lithium and other medications for bipolar can make a world of difference. Of course, with lithium, one needs to be careful. You need to monitor kidney function and thyroid and electrolytes. And for the bipolar 2, the more depressed type, sometimes a different kind of medication like Lamictal would be advised. Obviously, you need to see a psychiatrist for all of this. But I've seen with people with bipolar, once you give them the right treatment, usually in the form of medication, it can make a world of difference. The last thing you want to do is to take their zest for life away from them. You want them to still enjoy life. It's the last thing you want for them to happen, to become dull to the world. But at the same time, you want to have their feet be firmly on the ground. What's wonderful also with this is the insight factor kicks in. People, once they are well treated, they say, I was acting a bit strange, doctor, and now I feel so much better. If you know of somebody who appears to be in the midst of a manic episode and also in a deep, dark depression, what do you do? Well, oftentimes these people, they don't really want help, especially those with mania. So if you're a friend or a spouse, Not only do you have to be aware of the telltale signs of a manic episode or a depressed episode, but you need to do the best you can to connect with them, to be able to connect with them so they feel that you're on their side, not just sort of preaching to them or dictating to them. But finally, somebody who has bipolar, they absolutely need treatment. This can be an emergency. It could be life-threatening. So you need to get them to a physician, a competent physician, usually a psychiatrist. You need to get them to an emergency room because they can do devastating things to ruin their lives and ruin the lives of others. There's another thing I'd like to say here because I've been talking a lot about the soul in my talks, my other talks, talking about positive psychology, that we need to be in touch with our inner self, our soul. We need to have a more positive outlook on life. But bipolar is a medical illness. And telling somebody, just get in touch with your soul, just be more positive, ain't going to work. It's not going to work with these people. It's a medical illness. It's there in our neurons. It's there in our DNA. And in fact, many people with bipolar usually have a family relative with bipolar. It's a medical illness just like diabetes. You can't just sort of think your way out of it. Again, good treatment from a competent psychiatrist is absolutely necessary. Once they begin to get better, then of course, to be connected with our soul, to be connected with our true inner self is imperative for good emotional and mental health. Doctor, my eyes have seen the years in the slow parade of fears without crying. Now I want to understand. I have done all that I could to see the evil and the good without hiding. You must help me if you can. So if you know of somebody who's in the midst of a manic episode, and certainly in the midst of an intense depressive episode, don't just sort of let it float away. Be there for them and refer them to a competent physician. So today we're going to talk about medication treatment for depression. I mean, there's so many medications out there, so how do we figure this out? So it goes like this. Antidepressants, I need an antidepressant. Antidepressant, which kind of antidepressant? Yep, to choose an antidepressant. So I think the first thing to know is that people don't always, they think they need, but they don't really need an antidepressant. They'll come into my office and they say they're going through a hard time. They want to take a pill to take care of it. And I say to them, I'm not convinced that your kind of depression means medication. So oftentimes I advise them to get off the couch and exercise. At least 20 minutes a day, 6 out of the next 7 days. Do that and come back in a week and let's see where you're at. Sure enough, they do that. They come back in a week and many times they say, yeah, doctor, I am feeling a lot better. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't need an antidepressant. Hopefully they'll keep on exercising. Next is to know that the first law in psychiatry is to see if there's some physical reason for what's going on, what we call an organic cause of their depression. For example, let's say somebody's had a stroke, and especially if it affects the left frontal lobe, that could result in a profound depression. Parkinson's, well, that depletes dopamine, which is the pleasure neurotransmitter. And there can be hypothyroidism. And simply giving them a thyroid medication can make a world of difference, and you don't need a specific antidepressant. There's hormonal changes that happen. That's we see postpartum depression. There can be B12, low B12. There can be low iron. There can be medications which can create depression, like beta blockers for high blood pressure. Steroids, they can wreak havoc in somebody's brain. Of course, alcohol, that can deplete neurotransmitters, and marijuana long-term could result in apathy. So we need to look at an array of different physical possibilities that could be behind their depression, and maybe that's the first line of treatment before jumping to taking a medication specifically for depression. However, of course, there are those times when somebody truly needs an antidepressant. In general, I divide antidepressants into 4 categories. First of all, there's the serotonin antidepressants, the most famous of which is Prozac. There's also Zoloft, Lexapro, Paxil. They can be extremely powerful. They're probably the most used antidepressants throughout the world. Then there's the combination of serotonin and what we call norepinephrine. And those are Effexor and Cymbalta. Again, can be very powerful. Then a couple of what I call atypical antidepressants. There's Wellbutrin, which primarily works on dopamine and norepinephrine. Can be very energizing, motivating kind of antidepressant. Then there's Remeron, which is used, oftentimes can help with insomnia or to build up appetite. For example, we'll see in nursing homes an elderly person who just They've lost their appetite, they aren't sleeping at night, and Remeron can help them enormously. Then there's what we call the tricyclic antidepressants. These are sort of the old timers like imipramine and nortriptyline. They can especially help perhaps when the others don't work or when somebody's having a real profound kind of depression. So again, how to choose all these possibilities. Antidepressants. So oftentimes we doctors, we look at other kinds of things in order to make our choice. For example, what has worked in the past? Sometimes they've been on something in the past that worked. Or maybe it sort of worked, but then they had side effects. So maybe we can try it again, maybe starting at a lower dosage. Is there a family history of depression? Perhaps a kind of medication that somebody else in the family took that worked for them. That can be a go-to choice. Then if somebody's having, let's say, a lot of anxiety or irritability, I would usually pick the serotonin, the Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro kind of medication, which oftentimes needs sort of high dosages to not only help the depression, but to help with the anxiety. If someone's having a hard time with concentration or low energy, Wellbutrin can be extremely powerful. Suddenly they're filled with all sorts of energy, and indeed their ADHD is much better. Let's say they're having a hard time with sleep or with appetite, they're losing weight. Well, then of course Remeron is a wonderful choice. Let's say somebody has, let's say, fibromyalgia or diabetic neuropathy. So their Cymbalta can be very effective because we've learned that that can help with pain, with nerve pain. Also, side effects. We need to look at side effects because if they're intolerable, the patient is not going to want to continue. For example, with the serotonin antidepressants, there can be sexual side effects, a decrease of libido or a delayed orgasm. If someone's had a history of a seizure, well then with Wellbutrin, that can potentially lower the seizure threshold, make somebody more likely to have another seizure. With the tricyclics, we have to look at possible cardiac concerns and maybe do an EKG first and foremost. Also, there can be constipation and dry mouth. And the medication Effexor sometimes can actually increase blood pressure. So we look at all these various factors when we're trying to decide the most effective antidepressant. The other very important factor to recognize is that oftentimes, but not always, these antidepressants, well, they take 2 to 6 weeks before they really take effect. Of course, you may say, heck, I'm so depressed, I have to wait all this time. But yes, one does have to wait. Now, sometimes they can take effect very, very quickly within a week. And of course, there can be the placebo effect, just the fact that somebody's going for treatment and taking something can help them simply to begin to feel better. So one does need to hang in there and be patient. I would say the most important ingredient with medication treatment is for you, the patient, to speak up. This is a dialogue. Talk together with your psychiatrist, with your doctor. Speak up, ask questions, engage them. Don't just have the doctor take out his or her pen and just simply write a script and then say, see you in another month. Make it a dialogue. Get to know, let your doctor really get to know you. Speak up. Now, of course, there's other things that have become somewhat famous as of late. There's transcortical magnetic stimulation, which we can talk about at a different time. There's ketamine, which has proven to be extremely powerful, especially when people have a treatment-resistant depression, and also can be helpful for those who are going through suicide, because that can work quite rapidly. It usually doesn't have the positive effects in the long run. Usually has to be coupled with psychotherapy, which obviously is a good thing. But also, I must say that having run a psychiatric hospital, I've also seen sometimes people with ketamine can wind up having dissociations and getting out of touch with reality. So certainly one needs to be careful with that. Depression. So sadly, depression is worldwide. And as far as medications goes, this is what we think we know here in the 21st century. We do know a lot more now than we knew 100 years ago. And 100 years from now, well, they'll look back and realize how little we know now, but we have to do the best we can in the time in which we live. I hope this video is helpful for you. The main thing is to really engage your doctor in a real discussion about your treatment. Don't just let it go quickly. Don't just say, doctor, whatever you tell me. Really engage and don't be afraid to speak up. Of course, also there's the spiritual way to look at how we are, our mood, and to recognize that by having a clear idea of who we are and why we are here in the world, to wake up every day with a sense of gratitude and a sense of mission can make all the difference in the world. There's also to recognize what we call the healthiness of depression. That yes, sometimes we have to go through these difficult times because that's an opportunity for us to grow, an opportunity for us to learn, and to make our lives better. But again, there are many people, sadly, who suffer from a real dark, palpable depression, and then medication can make a world of difference. Medication will get that person out of the pit of depression, and then they're on the, even playing field. And from there, they can use their strengths, develop their strengths. They can work on reconfiguring their neurons with positivity, with a sense of mission, with being connected in a spiritual way. And together, that can make all the difference in the world. Anhedonia. Anhedonia, in its most simple definition, means lack of being able to experience joy, not being able to have pleasure in things that you usually would enjoy. Sports or music or something spiritual or food. You just can't get that pleasurable feeling. I don't know where I went wrong, but the feeling's gone and I just can't get it back. Now, anhedonia is not a diagnosis. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of a diagnosis, the most common being major depression. Major depression, somebody can go through an intense period. It can last for a long time of anhedonia, not able to experience joy. However, it also can be found in people with trauma in their past, post-traumatic stress. It can be found in people with bipolar. When they have the down pole of depression, they can have anhedonia. Even people who have schizophrenia, people who are experiencing psychotic symptoms, they can fall into the abyss where they simply do not experience pleasure anymore. Some thoughts, what happens to people? Yeah, doctor, I hear the music, but I love music, I love piano, but I just can't sit down and get the same feeling like I used to. It doesn't stir me like it used to. Yeah, doctor, I go out with my friends and I just feel like I'm behind a piece of glass. I'm just sort of playing a role. I'm an imposter. I try to put on a smile, but I'm not really there. I'm somewhere else. Yeah, I eat my food, but it doesn't give me pleasure anymore. Everything just sort of tastes the same. Everything is dull. I don't enjoy any of my hobbies anymore. I can't even go on a vacation and enjoy myself. I don't want to call anybody. And it goes on and on. An intense feeling of lack of pleasure, lack of joy. So what's going on? Well, from a scientific perspective, it does originate, of course, in the brain. In the brain, we have those neurotransmitters all around. The main one for experiencing pleasure and joy is called dopamine. And what happens is there's a lack of transmission of the dopamine neurotransmitter. When this begins to happen, then, of course, people are feeling less joy. This can happen in certain parts of the brain. There's certain areas of the brain that aren't functioning. Also, the front of the brain, which is in charge of executive functioning, that can stop working. Amygdala part of the brain, which is the emotional part. You just stop registering emotions like you used to. And it goes on and on. Of course, there can be certain physical conditions that can contribute to this feeling of anhedonia. Somebody can have Parkinson's disease. Somebody can have low-acting thyroid. Somebody could have a stroke. There could be a number of physical things that are going on. You see, what usually happens to people is they do things which are generally pleasurable. And then it ignites let's say a spurt of this dopamine. And then you feel a sense of reward. You feel a sense of pleasure. But in somebody experiencing anhedonia, that doesn't happen. Either because of certain things not going right in certain parts of the brain, or because the neurotransmitter, the dopamine, simply is not working all that well. Those are the physical things behind it. Then there's the psychological. Obviously, somebody who grows up with a very strong negative self-image of themselves. So then they begin to look at life, look everywhere through a negative lens. And then it can be very difficult for them to really expand and have joy. Not only do they not experience joy, but they don't expect to experience joy. And even more so, even when negative things happen, and they're supposed to, most people would register sadness or tearfulness and really feel something. The person with anhedonia can't even muster up those feelings. As a result, life is not even worth trying. Everything is muted, blunted. You just can't get it back. You don't even feel like trying anymore. So what to do? Is there a treatment for this? Well, of course there's a treatment for this. First of all, medication can possibly help. Not always, but it certainly can be worth looking into. I would say the medication, the antidepressant that is most helpful usually for anhedonia is Wellbutrin. Wellbutrin, which is responsible primarily for the dopamine pathway and the norepinephrine pathway. The classic serotonin medications like Prozac or Zoloft, they also could be helpful, but sometimes they have a blunting effect. It can actually add to the dull feeling that happens with anhedonia. So as far as therapy goes, probably the most common use therapy for anhedonia is what we call behavioral activation therapy. In other words, action precedes emotions. We have to get ourselves into action mode, and then the feelings will begin to follow. If somebody just sort of follows their feelings all the time, well, that can keep them trapped, and they may not ever actually do anything. They wind up avoiding things. And the more they avoid, the more that will breed even more avoidance. So in therapy, we'll look at the inactivity that somebody is doing, their avoidance that they're doing, wasting time. We look at those things very closely. And then to try to get somebody out of the funk, the pit of anhedonia, we suggest little things for them begin to do, like just take a walk down the street, just a short little walk. Or I know you don't feel like calling your friend, but give them a call anyway. Maybe allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable. And if it's a good friend, that can begin to open up things for yourself. Or maybe sit down and play piano for 5 minutes. In other words, you may have no feeling going on, but at least get yourself going in some kind of action that can jar somebody out of their anhedonia. Another approach is to recognize that we can have a lot of trapped emotions going on inside of us. We've been hurt in our past. We've had trauma in our past. And so there it is inside of us. We are afraid. We're afraid of anything to reach out, to do something, because we're afraid of getting hurt again. And so we just sit. We sit and we do nothing. It's much safer. It's much calmer, but it doesn't get us anywhere. It's what we call trapped emotions. So in the type of work called emotion code, that can help somebody to release these trapped emotions, and they begin to allow themselves to feel, and it reignites beautiful relationships with their friends and with their family. There's another huge area that has to do, of course, with spirituality. The fact that we do have a soul inside of us, a soul which is pure and which is good. And so even if you're feeling like you don't enjoy anything, you can at least wake up in the morning and the first thoughts in your head or the first words that come out of your mouth could be a sense of gratitude. To have gratitude for the basic things that you have. I mean, if suddenly you woke up one morning and you couldn't see, imagine, and then 2 minutes later you could see, imagine what profound gratitude you would have. To recognize the beautiful things that you basically have every single day. A lot of us, even though we have the pure soul, stuff gets on top of our soul. Stuff interferes with our soul. Stuff covers our soul. And we don't know what to do, how to get out of that. So again, besides giving a sense of gratitude, recognizing that every single morning, to spend some time every day, usually again in the morning, where you do some kind of meditation or mindfulness. Spend some time where you try to connect with that essential part of you. If you can do that, it's sort of like working out. You do that every single day, and that develops, it becomes part of you, becomes part of what you do, and you get more in touch with that essential part of you. I don't know where I went wrong, but the feeling's gone and I just can't get it back. But you can get it back. So as many years ago, when I was a 19-year-old fellow, I fell into a huge funk. I don't know what was going on, but all this stuff felt like it was happening inside of me. I was depressed every single day. I was struggling, suffering inside. I had no joy. I couldn't eat. I was losing weight. I couldn't sleep. Thoughts kept going through my head again and again. I was in a state of emotional and mental paralysis. What should I do with my life? I don't know where I'm going. Ironically, I was traveling in Europe with a couple friends of mine, which is what everybody did back in those days. And yet I was suffering inside. At that time, a song came out by the famous songwriter Paul Simon called American Tune. And boy, did those words ever resonate with me. I don't know a soul who's not been battered. I don't have a friend who feels at ease. Don't know a dream that's not been shattered or driven to its knees. I feel like my dreams were being shattered. And then later in the song it says, I wonder what's gone wrong. I can't help it. I wonder what's gone wrong. Yep, I was wondering what is going wrong. So upon my return to America, I actually went and I spoke with a rabbi, even though in those days I didn't really speak with rabbis too much. And I said, I'm very perplexed. I've got these 5 things that I want to do with my life professionally, and I need to choose which one. Which one is the right one for me? Rabbi, can you help me? Tell me which one I should choose. The rabbi looked at me with a smile on his face and he said, John, I can't choose the profession for you, but I can tell you what you need to do. in a larger sense, which is you need to know yourself. You need to get to know your identity, who you are. Go back, understand your ancestry, understand where you came from, and then know what your purpose is in the world, why you are here. Once you clarify those things, then the choice of what to do will follow naturally. But Rabbi, you don't understand. I need to figure this out. I need to figure this out now. I'm suffering. Can't you see? Rabbi smiled, and with a lot of care, he repeated his words. But I was in no place then. I was a young guy. I wasn't able to absorb his words, and I went on and was very frustrated and depressed and paralyzed. What to do? It took a while, but eventually I did come out of it, and I then recognized the power, the wisdom of the Rabbi's words. And I came to understand what identity is all about. Identity falls, basically, to simplify, I guess, into three categories. First of all, there's our nature, what we would call DNA. What we've inherited from our parents, our grandparents, from our ancestry. Certain kinds of ways about us. We have discovered in psychiatry that DNA has an incredible amount to do with even our personality style, let alone our mood, our anxieties, all these things, our resilience. DNA is ever so powerful. And we know that when people don't have enough of the neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, that can result in some profound depressions and intense anxiety and obsessional thinking. Next, for identity, is our nurture. The things that happened to us when we were, especially when we were very young. The wonderful things that happened to us, the attachments we made, primarily with our parents, and then the attachment ruptures that have happened to us as well. To better understand this, because those things, especially in our early years, can affect our neurons. And those neurons get set, and we wind up responding to things in certain ways. Now, of course, we can work on this. That's where therapy can be ever so powerful. And we know with neuron plasticity that we can actually change the configurations of our neurons, and we can turn our life around. But what I ultimately discovered is that what's most important for identity is to recognize that inside of us, we actually have a soul. This may seem obvious. Of course we have a soul. We human beings, we have an actual piece of divinity there inside of us. You know, in that song, American Tune, another part goes, and I dreamed that my soul rose unexpectedly, looking back down at me, smiled reassuringly. Because yes, we do have a soul. But our soul doesn't go out of us, except when we pass away physically. The soul is there inside of us. It's a piece of divinity inside of us. And that's why we human beings, we all have this incredible yearning for that which is transcendent. Sadly, unfortunately, in the world of mental and emotional health, oftentimes, too often, the soul is ignored. And yet it's such a vital part. It's the most vital part. It's actually who we really are. Once we understand this, then we can work on being connected to our soul. We need to understand that actually, despite the fact that we have all this physical stuff around us, this material stuff around us, our essence is that we are actually spiritual beings living in a physical world. We need to integrate the spiritual and the physical and channel the physical, therefore, to become more holy, more spiritual. How to go about this? Well, first, to start with that realization. Next, to wake up every single morning with a sense of gratitude, to be thankful for the soul that I have inside of me, to start every day with that consciousness. And then to spend time. You know, many of us may work out physically. It takes a lot of work. We have to do it every day to work on ourselves. The same thing applies spiritually. We don't just go on a weekend retreat. We don't just go to synagogue or a church or a monastery for a day once a week. No, it has to be an everyday type of thing. We can read things, study things that are related to spirituality. And then to spend time in meditation or mindfulness, or call it prayer, where we connect. The more you do that every day, the more you get in touch with that which is the essence of who you are. And finally, and perhaps most important, then to reach out. Reach out to the world, reach out to others, try to help others. And what you discover is that your mood is a lot better, your feelings are a lot better. Many people, they chase after happiness. I want to be happy, I want to be happy. And all they're thinking about is themselves. Me, me, me. Unfortunately, that's a lot of the world that we live in. But when we reach out to others, not only will it help them, but it will come back and help ourselves as well. And so, yes, I was perplexed back then, 19 years old and well into my 20s. It was my journey. And what I discovered is we all have our journey. We have to make the journey our journey. And what I also discovered is because I was suffering so, I was in such a state of depression and paralysis that it's actually been helpful for me in my work as a psychiatrist, because I'm able to understand what people are going through. By going through my own struggles, I'm able to connect with others. And so, yes, we all need to go on our journey. We need to make it our own. And yes, we can, to help us with depression, with emotional paralysis, obsessional thinking, yes, medication can be ever so helpful. That's true. Medication is not always the answer. Yes, therapy can be incredibly powerful. We can reconfigure our neurons and work on ourselves. But most important is to be connected to our soul. With that recipe, I've seen it help so many people. You know, at the end of that beautiful song, American Tune, it says, oh, tomorrow's gonna be another working day. I'm trying to get some rest. That's all I'm trying, to get some rest. So yeah, rest is important. We need to have the time to rest in order to get the energy that we need. But rest should not take over our entire life. Rest should not be a form of giving up. We need to do the work to be in touch with who we really are and find our purpose and our mission as we go forward. Probably the worst moment in my career as a psychiatrist. His name was Bob, a made-up name, of course. He was 38 years old. He told his wife that he wanted to hang himself. His wife, of course, did not let him out of her sight, was able to convince him to come to the emergency room, and from there he was admitted to my psychiatric ward. When I met Bob, he told me that life was over. He was in too much pain, too much suffering. Life was totally insufferable. Doctor, I want to commit suicide. Suicide. Suicide per year affects 700,000 people worldwide, and in the United States, 50,000 people per year. And in the United States, the numbers are going up. In looking at suicide, we psychiatrists look at what I would call the 5 Ds, 5 categories, all starting with a D. Number 1 is depression. Yes, that makes sense. People who commit suicide are deeply depressed. Usually the biological, very deep, dark, palpable depression. It's there in the brain, in the frontal lobe or in the amygdala. People can get more impulsive. People are deeply depressed. Also can happen when they have a lot of stress, increasing cortisol levels. It can be a genetic predisposition. If there's members of the family that have committed suicide, then it's more likely that somebody else could do the act. Early trauma, which then affects one's neurons and makes somebody ultimately less resilient. Next, the next D is disease. People are in the thick of a disease with terrible pain, sometimes with a poor prognosis, and so they simply want to give up. The third D is disability. Somebody is at the point where they really cannot function anymore, and so life is hopeless. I'm of no use. I'm a burden on society. Just let me go. The fourth D, disconnectedness, to not be connected. And this is where spirituality comes into play, because people who are more connected in a spiritual way, connected to their inner self, usually have much more of a strength and connected to a community where they can get a lot of support. The fifth D is deadly arms, firearms. We know that people who have firearms in their possession, they are more likely to complete suicide than those who do not. The tragedy is that most people who I've met, and I've met many who come into the psychiatric hospital with wanting to die, with wanting to commit suicide, with full intention and a plan to commit suicide. Once they come in and they get treatment and we talk and they see that somebody cares about themselves, myself and the nurses and the entire staff, and we try to get family involved and maybe even community members involved. So people are ever so happy, if I can use the word, that they did not go forward with it. There's a famous story of the fellow who actually jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And midway in flight, he totally regretted what he was doing. He said, I want to live. And miraculously, he did live. It hardly ever happens when people jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, but he did. And he went on to be a motivational speaker, to talk to people about how to handle things when they are feeling suicidal. Now, it's important for us, not only mental health professionals, but all of us, to be aware, keep our eyes open when somebody is moving in the direction of wanting to take their life. What can you see? These people can become more socially withdrawn, isolative. They can start using substances more so than before. They may give their possessions away. They start talking about that they're just a burden on their family, on society. And then sometimes there's a certain calmness that will appear because they've made peace with the fact that they're going to be taking their life. And so they have a sense of calm. These are all telltale signs to look for. Next is what to do when you sense that somebody is moving in that direction. Well, a lot of people are afraid to reach out and talk to them, but that's exactly what you should do. A lot of people are afraid to say, are you feeling like you don't want to live anymore? They feel like if they bring up the topic, that may encourage the person to want to do that. But exactly the opposite is the case. Reach out, ask them, are you feeling like you don't want to live anymore? If they say yes, are you feeling that you might be suicidal? And then don't try to fix them. Be with them. Listen, the ultimate of empathy. Check in with them regularly. Show them that you care. You can also give them the number for the suicide hotline. Here in America, the number is 988. Everybody is yearning for connection. So reach out to others. Allow themselves to be vulnerable without any judgment whatsoever. Simply be there and be with them. It'll make a gigantic difference. And so it was with Bob that I did spend a lot of time with him. We had a lot of good talks. He seemed like he was getting better. We talked about his strengths, talked about what he could do going into the future, met together with his wife. We did start him on antidepressant medication. He said it was sitting well with him. I kept him in the hospital for quite a while, even though I was under pressure from the hospital administration because the insurance company wasn't paying for his stay anymore. And he certainly seemed like he was moving in the right direction. 4 days after discharge, his wife came to the hospital to pick up some belongings that had been left behind when she returned home. Bob had hanged himself. I thought, what had I done wrong? What more could I have done? The sages say that from a spiritual perspective, that suicide is never an option. That our body is a gift from God, and therefore we do not have the right to choose to take our body. I actually shared these spiritual thoughts with Bob, and he seemed to understand. It seemed to resonate with him. But obviously, we didn't do enough. Sometimes you can only do so much. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen the sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend, but I always thought that I'd see you again.